He returned from a luxury trip with his mistress and found his son had a new last name. Lucas Whitmore stepped into the silent house just after midnight, still smelling faintly of hotel soap and expensive cologne. The door closed, a-click, and for a moment he smiled, relieved. No questions. No confrontation. Exactly how he liked it. His phone buzzed. A message from Belle. She had already landed in Miami and sent a photo of herself by the pool, silk robe slipping off one shoulder. Lucas typed a quick reply, telling her he missed her already, then loosened his tie and glanced around the living room. Something was wrong. The lights were off, but the house felt emptied out in a way that went beyond sleep. No cartoon voices from the TV, no small sneakers by the door, no lunchbox on the counter. Lucas frowned and checked the hallway. Oliver's bedroom door was open. The bed was made. Too neatly. "Emily?" he called, irritation creeping into his voice. No answer. He told himself not to overreact. Hannah had probably taken Oliver to her sister's place. She did that sometimes, when she was emotional. Lucas walked into his office, tossed his jacket on the chair, and opened his MacBook, intending to clear emails before bed. That was when he saw it. A notification from Oliver's private school sat unread at the top of his inbox. Subject line, Enrollment Confirmation, Oliver Hale. Lucas stared at the screen, certain it had to be a mistake. He opened the email, scanning it once, then again, slower this time. The words did not change. Student name, Oliver Hale. Emergency guardian, Hannah Hale. No mention of Whitmore anywhere. His chest tightened. Lucas refreshed the page. Then he logged into the school portal. Same result. New last name, new emergency contact. His name reduced to a blank space. He grabbed his phone and dialed Hannah. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. And again. Nothing. A pulse of anger surged through him, sharp and hot. She had crossed a line. A permanent one. You don't erase a father, Lucas thought. You don't rewrite a family without consequences. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Belle. Did you fix everything with your wife yet? She asked. Lucas looked back at the screen, at the name that no longer belonged to him, and felt something unfamiliar settle in his gut. Fear. Because for the first time, he realized Hannah hadn't acted out of emotion at all. She had acted with purpose, and whatever she had planned, he was already too late to stop it. Lucas didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen island as dawn crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows, his untouched espresso growing cold beside him. Every few minutes, he refreshed the school portal, convinced the system would correct itself. A glitch, a clerical error, something he could call IT about and make disappear with one sharp email. But the name stayed. Oliver Hale. Lucas whispered it under his breath, tasting the unfamiliar weight of it. Hale wasn't a typo. It was Hannah's maiden name. A name she had quietly buried when they married. A name Lucas had once dismissed as forgettable. Now it stared back at him in bold letters, stamped across official school records. His phone vibrated. A voicemail notification. Hannah. He stabbed the screen and put the phone to his ear, already preparing his speech. Controlled. Authoritative. The tone he used in boardrooms when someone made a costly mistake. But Hannah's voice wasn't shaky. It wasn't angry. It was calm, almost formal. Lucas, I'm not taking your calls right now, she said evenly. Everything regarding Oliver has been handled legally. You'll receive the documents soon. Please don't come looking for us. The message ended. Lucas slammed the phone onto the counter, the sound echoing through the empty house. Legally. The word hit harder than any insult. Hannah had never spoken like that before. She used to ask. To explain, to apologize even when she'd done nothing wrong. This wasn't the woman who cried quietly in the bathroom so Oliver wouldn't hear. Lucas grabbed his keys and drove straight to the school. The private academy sat behind tall iron gates, manicured lawns glowing in the early sun. He strode inside without slowing, ignoring the receptionist's startled greeting. I'm here for my son, he snapped. There's been a mistake. The receptionist hesitated, then glanced at her screen. Her expression shifted. Polite, guarded. I'm sorry, Mr. Whitmore, she said carefully. You're not listed as an authorized guardian. Lucas laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. That's impossible. Before she could respond, a tall woman in a navy blazer stepped out of a nearby office. Margaret Hale. The headmistress. Mr. Whitmore, Margaret said, her tone cool. "We were expecting this reaction." "Fix it," Lucas demanded. "Now." Margaret met his gaze without flinching. "There is nothing to fix. Your son's last name was changed in accordance with state law. All documentation has been verified." Lucas felt the ground tilt beneath him. "You let her do this without telling me?" Margaret folded her hands. "You were informed. Through proper legal channels. You simply weren't paying attention." As Lucas stood there, stunned and furious, he realized something chilling. Hannah hadn't just left. She had prepared. And whatever proof she held, it was strong enough to erase him from his own child's life. Lucas left the school with his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. The morning sun felt too bright, too cheerful, mocking the storm rising in his chest. As he slid into his car, memories he had long buried began forcing their way back, unwelcome and sharp. There was a time when Hannah Whitmore barely slept. Back when Oliver was born 6 weeks early, fragile and wheezing, she sat beside the crib night after night, counting every breath. Lucas remembered those nights only vaguely. He had been busy then, conference calls, investors in different time zones, deals that couldn't wait. He told himself providing money was the same as being present. Hannah never argued. She never raised her voice. She learned quickly that asking for help only annoyed him. When Oliver's doctor first mentioned asthma, Hannah spent hours researching treatments, insurance loopholes, specialists. Lucas waved it off. "Kids grow out of it," he'd said, barely looking up from his phone. The bills annoyed him more than the diagnosis. There were moments he chose not to remember. Hannah standing in the kitchen, holding a prescription bottle, asking quietly if they could adjust the budget. Lucas replying that a family trip had already been planned. Hannah nodding, swallowing her words. She adapted. She always did. She stopped asking him to attend appointments, stopped calling when Oliver had night attacks. She learned to drive to the hospital alone at 2 a.m, Oliver's small body trembling in the back seat, while Lucas slept through his silenced phone. In Lucas's version of the marriage, none of that mattered. He had given her a house, a lifestyle, security. That was the trade, wasn't it? But now, sitting in his car, he realized Hannah hadn't left suddenly. She had been slowly withdrawing for years, documenting everything while he was distracted by dinners, trips, and Brielle's easy laughter. His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Brielle. A courier notification popped up. Legal documents scheduled for delivery. Estimated arrival, 11 a.m. Lucas's stomach dropped. He drove home faster than he should have, pulling into the driveway just as a man in a gray uniform stepped out of a van. Lucas barely waited before grabbing the envelope from his hands. Inside were copies of medical records, consent forms, and one document that made his breath hitch. A signed statement. His signature. Dated 2 years ago. He remembered it now. A rushed afternoon. Hannah asking him to sign something for the insurance. He hadn't read it. He never did. The form stated that Lucas Whitmore declined to be listed as primary medical decision-maker due to work-related unavailability. The words blurred as his hands began to shake. For the first time, Lucas understood the truth. Hannah hadn't stolen his son. She had simply stepped into the space he had abandoned legally, quietly, and with devastating precision. And now, the law was standing firmly on her side. Lucas sat alone in the living room, the legal documents spread across the marble coffee table like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known he was playing. The house felt unfamiliar now, stripped of the quiet routines that had once held it together. No soft footsteps. No distant cough from Oliver's room. Only silence and the dull realization that Hannah had planned this long before she walked out the door. He tried calling her again. Straight to voicemail. For the first time in years, Lucas poured himself a drink before noon. He told himself it was to steady his nerves, but the truth was uglier. He was scared. Not of losing money or reputation, but of losing control. Hannah had always been predictable. Reliable. She absorbed his neglect without protest, or so he thought. He remembered the early days of their marriage, when Hannah still worked as a compliance assistant. She came home exhausted, eyes red from staring at spreadsheets and regulations all day, yet she still cooked dinner and listened to him talk about his ambitions. When Oliver was born early, Hannah quit without hesitation. Lucas had praised her sacrifice publicly, using it as proof of their strong family values. Privately, He grew used to her being there, always available, always accommodating. He mistook endurance for weakness. Lucas stood and walked into the bedroom closet, searching for anything that might explain how she had pulled this off. In the back, behind his suits, he found a thin folder he had never noticed before. Inside were neatly labeled tabs: medical, education, correspondence, copies of emails he had ignored, notes from doctors he never met, even records of times he failed to show up. His name appeared again and again, not as a villain, but as an absence. That was what cut deepest. The doorbell rang sharply, snapping him out of his thoughts. Another courier, another envelope. This one bore a law firm's letterhead. Lucas tore it open. The letter was brief, professional, and devastating. Hannah had filed for sole legal custody, citing documented neglect and signed waivers. The temporary order was already in effect. Any attempt to remove Oliver from her care without court approval would be considered a violation. Lucas sank onto the edge of the bed, the paper trembling in his hand. He wanted to be angry, to shout, to blame Belle, work, bad timing, anything but himself. His phone buzzed. A message from Belle lit up the screen. "This is getting messy," she wrote. "Make sure it doesn't affect your investors." Lucas stared at her words, then at the documents in his hand, and finally at the empty space where his son should have been. In that moment, a terrifying truth settled in. Hannah hadn't just left to protect Oliver. She had left because she no longer trusted Lucas to be a father at all. And the worst part was, the evidence was proving her right. By afternoon, Lucas's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Missed calls from his assistant. 2 messages from his business partner asking why a compliance alert had flagged his name. And then, finally, a number he didn't recognize. A hospital line. Lucas answered with irritation already sharpened in his voice. "This is Lucas Whitmore." "Mr. Whitmore," a calm male voice said, "this is Dr. Ethan Brooks from Riverside Children's Hospital. I'm calling regarding Oliver." The sound of his son's name sliced through Lucas's chest. "What happened?" he demanded. "Is he hurt?" There was a brief pause on the other end. "Oliver experienced a severe asthma episode this morning. He's stable now." His mother brought him in promptly. Lucas exhaled, his relief quickly morphing into anger. "Why wasn't I notified immediately?" Another pause. "Longer this time." "Because you're not listed as an emergency contact," Dr. Brooks replied evenly. "Nor are you authorized to make medical decisions for him." Lucas stood up so fast the chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That's ridiculous. I'm his father." "Yes," the doctor said, his tone firm but not unkind. "You are. But according to the records, you signed a waiver declining primary medical responsibility. Mrs. Hale acted exactly as instructed." Hale. Hearing the name spoken aloud made it real in a way the paperwork hadn't. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "I want to speak to my son." "I'm afraid that won't be possible right now," Dr. Brooks replied. "Oliver is resting, and his mother has requested limited contact for the time being." "Requested?" Lucas snapped. "She can't just decide that." "Actually," the doctor said quietly, "she can. And she has. Thanks for watching." The call ended before Lucas could respond. He stood frozen in the middle of the room, phone clenched in his hand, replaying the doctor's words over and over. Oliver had been in the hospital. Again. And Lucas hadn't been there. Again. His phone buzzed almost immediately after. A text from Belle. "Are you okay? You sound distracted." "Also, I heard a rumor. Are you having custody issues?" Lucas stared at the message, something inside him hardening. He didn't reply. Instead, he opened his laptop and began searching his own name, half expecting nothing. But the results came quickly. Whispers on legal forums, a quiet note in an investor group chat, nothing public yet, but the cracks were there. This wasn't just about Hannah anymore. It was about how much damage had already been done while he wasn't looking. As Lucas sank back onto the couch, the image of Oliver gasping for breath replayed in his mind, unbearable and vivid. For the first time, fear overtook anger completely, because he was starting to understand something far worse than betrayal. Hannah hadn't cut him out to punish him. She had cut him out because, when it mattered most, he simply hadn't been there. And now, the consequences were closing in faster than he could run from them. Lucas drove to the hospital without thinking, his mind racing faster than the traffic around him. He didn't know what he expected to do when he got there. Argue, demand answers, force his way into his son's room, but instinct pushed him forward. For years, instinct had served him well in business. Today, it betrayed him. At the front desk, the nurse checked his ID, then looked at her screen. Her expression softened with something that looked dangerously close to pity. "I'm sorry, sir," she said. "Mrs. Hale asked that no one disturb Oliver right now." Lucas bristled at the name. "I'm his father." "Yes," she replied gently, "but you're not authorized." Those words followed him like a shadow as he turned away, fists clenched. He paced the hallway, replaying the doctor's voice in his head. Waiver, declined responsibility, work-related unavailability. He remembered the day he signed it now with brutal clarity. It had been an ordinary afternoon. Hannah stood by the kitchen counter, Oliver napping upstairs, papers spread neatly in front of her. She'd said the insurance company needed updated forms. Lucas had been halfway through an email, distracted, annoyed. "Just sign at the bottom," she'd said quietly. He hadn't asked questions. He never did. His signature came easily then, careless and confident, the mark of a man who assumed there would always be time to fix things later. Now that same signature was the reason he was standing alone in a hospital hallway, barred from his own child. His phone rang again. This time, it was his father. "Lucas," Noah Whitmore Sr. said, his voice steady, authoritative in the way it always had been. "We need to talk." Lucas swallowed. "She's turning Oliver against me." There was a pause. "No," his father replied. "She's protecting him." That stung more than Lucas expected. "I reviewed the documents," Noah continued. "The waiver. The medical records. Hannah followed the law precisely. You gave up those rights yourself." "I didn't mean to," Lucas snapped. "Intent doesn't matter," his father said firmly. "Impact does." Lucas leaned against the wall, the weight of those words settling heavily on his chest. For the first time, he wondered how many times Hannah had stood alone in moments like this, making decisions he had avoided. "Fix this," Lucas said, his voice lower now. "You're a retired judge. You know how." Noah exhaled slowly. "I can advise you. I can't erase your choices." It is autumn. The call ended, leaving Lucas staring at the sterile white floor. Across the hallway, a door opened briefly. He caught a glimpse of Hannah through the glass, sitting beside Oliver's bed, her hand wrapped around his, her face calm but exhausted. She didn't look at Lucas. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, Lucas understood the truth he'd spent years running from. Hannah hadn't taken anything from him. He had signed it away himself. And the next battle wouldn't be about rights. It would be about whether he deserved to earn them back. Hannah didn't expect Lucas to show up at the hospital again. She noticed him through the glass before he noticed her, standing stiffly near the hallway, chairs, jacket wrinkled, eyes hollow. For a brief second, something old stirred in her chest. Not love, not anger, just recognition. This was the man she had once trusted to stand beside her, and who had failed her when it mattered most. Oliver slept peacefully, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Hannah waited until the nurse confirmed his condition was stable before stepping out into the hallway. Lucas turned at the sound of her footsteps. "Hannah," he said quickly, as if afraid she might disappear again. "We need to talk." She studied him for a moment, calm and unreadable. "You have 5 minutes." That alone unsettled him. "You can't keep me away from my son," Lucas began, his voice tight. "This has gone too far." Hannah folded her arms. "No, Lucas, this is exactly as far as it needed to go." He opened his mouth to argue, but she spoke first, and her voice didn't shake. "You weren't there when Oliver stopped breathing the first time, or the second, or the third. You weren't there when the doctor asked me to choose treatments and I had to decide alone." She met his eyes. "You weren't there when he cried for you." Lucas flinched. "I was working." "I know," Hannah said simply. "You always were." Her tone wasn't bitter. That frightened him more than anger ever could. "I didn't do this to hurt you," she continued. "I did it because I had to choose between protecting your pride and protecting our child. And for once, I chose him." Lucas took a step closer. "You should have told me." "I did," she replied. "Every time I asked for help, every time I asked you to come home, you just didn't listen." A nurse passed by, glancing between them. Hannah lowered her voice. "This isn't about punishment. It's about safety, stability, consistency, things Oliver needs. And what about me? Lucas asked quietly. Hannah paused, then answered honestly. Right now, you're not what he needs. The words landed like a blow. You don't get to decide that forever, Lucas said, desperation creeping in. Hannah nodded. No, the court will. She turned to leave, then stopped. You'll get the hearing notice tomorrow. I suggest you prepare. End quote. As she walked back into Oliver's room, Lucas stood frozen, realizing something terrifying. This was the first time Hannah had ever stood her ground. And she wasn't backing down. Because the woman he underestimated had finally learned the power of saying no, and she intended to use it. Lucas didn't remember driving home. The city blurred past his windshield as his mind replayed Hannah's words again and again. Calm, precise, unyielding. That was what unsettled him most. She hadn't cried. She hadn't begged. She hadn't tried to negotiate. She had spoken like someone who had already made peace with the consequences. And Lucas hated that. He slammed the front door behind him and paced the living room, phone in hand, rage building with every unanswered call. He dialed his attorney. Voicemail. He dialed his assistant, his partner, anyone who might help him regain control. Everyone seemed suddenly unavailable. By the time Belle called, his patience was gone. What is going on? She asked, her voice sharp. I'm hearing things, Lucas, things that make you look unstable. That's what you're worried about? He snapped. My image? There was a brief silence. Of course, Belle replied. That's what matters. Lucas laughed bitterly. My son was in the hospital. And he's fine, right? She said quickly. So let's focus on damage control. Something inside Lucas cracked. He ended the call without a word and threw his phone onto the couch. The screen lit up again moments later with an incoming message, an automated notice from the family court. Hearing scheduled. Temporary custody order attached. He opened the document, skimming until the words blurred. Supervised visitation. Mandatory parenting. Evaluation. His name listed beneath a paragraph outlining documented neglect. Neglect. Lucas felt his chest tighten. He had always believed neglect was something obvious, something cruel, not missed calls, not absence, not paperwork signed in haste. His hands shook as he poured another drink, barely tasting it as it burned down his throat. He thought of Oliver's small hand in Hannah's, of the way she had stood in that hallway, unafraid of him for the first time. That fearlessness was dangerous. In a surge of anger, Lucas grabbed his keys again and drove not to the hospital, but to Hannah's sister's apartment. He pounded on the door until the neighbors stared. When Hannah finally appeared in the doorway, her expression hardened instantly. Leave, she said. You think you can erase me? Lucas shouted, his voice echoing down the hall. You think the court is on your side forever? Hannah didn't raise her voice. I think you should stop before you make this worse. Or what? He sneered. She looked at him steadily. Or, you prove everything I told the judge was true. The door closed quietly in his face. As Lucas stood there, breathing hard, he realized what he had just done. He hadn't scared Hannah. He had shown her exactly who he was under pressure. And somewhere, behind closed doors, that moment was already being added to the record that would decide his fate. The email arrived the next morning at exactly 8:12 a.m. Lucas saw the sender's name before he opened it, Family Court Services. His stomach tightened, as if his body understood the damage before his mind did. He clicked anyway, eyes scanning fast, impatient, until the words slowed him down. Supplemental evidence received and added to case file. Lucas reread the sentence 3 times. He scrolled. Attached were 3 items, 1 video file, 2 written statements. The video was time-stamped from the night before. His breath caught. It was him standing in the hallway outside Hannah's sister's apartment, face flushed, voice raised. The angle was slightly tilted, grainy, clearly recorded on a phone from inside an apartment across the hall. He heard his own voice echo down the corridor, sharp and unrestrained. You think you can erase me? He shouted on the screen. You think the court is on your side forever? Lucas slammed the laptop shut, heart pounding. Too late. He opened it again, forcing himself to watch the rest. Hannah's voice followed, quiet, steady, unmistakably calm. The contrast made him look unhinged. The door closing softly in his face felt louder now than it had in the moment. Below the video were two statements. The first was from the building's night security officer. Objective, professional. Describing Lucas's raised voice, the disturbance, the complaints from neighbors. The second made his hands tremble. Margaret Hale, headmistress. She described Lucas's earlier visit to the school. His demand, his refusal to accept boundaries, his tone, her concern for Oliver's emotional safety. Lucas leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a pattern. His phone buzzed. Belle again. "I don't think this is going to work," her message read. "You're becoming a liability." Liability? That word, more than any other, finally broke through Lucas's denial. This was how the world saw him now, not as a father fighting for his child, but as a man unraveling because he'd lost control. Another email notification popped up, this one from his attorney. "We need to talk." Immediately, Lucas didn't reply. He thought of Hannah's face in the hospital hallway, not angry, not afraid, just resolved. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't needed to. Because while Lucas had been shouting, Hannah had been documenting. While he reacted, she prepared. And now, every outburst, every misstep, every careless moment was being stacked neatly against him, brick by brick. For the first time, Lucas understood the depth of what he was facing. This wasn't a fight he could intimidate his way through. It was a record, and it was growing. And the more he struggled to reclaim control, the more evidence he was giving Hannah to ensure he never would. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant, a place where emotions were reduced to facts and feelings translated into files. Lucas sat at the long table beside his attorney, suit pressed, posture rigid, trying to look like the man he had always presented to the world, controlled, confident, untouchable. Hannah sat across the room. She looked different here. Not dressed to impress, not trying to appear fragile, just composed. A simple blouse, hair pulled back, her hands rested calmly on the table, fingers laced, as if she had already accepted whatever came next. That terrified him more than any accusation. The judge entered. Formalities followed. Then the review began. Document after document was entered into record. Medical waivers, missed appointment logs, school correspondence, video evidence. Each item landed with a quiet finality Lucas hadn't anticipated. This wasn't a dramatic showdown. It was a methodical dismantling. When Hannah was asked to speak, she stood slowly. "I didn't plan to leave my marriage," she said, voice steady. "I planned to protect my child. They expect divider. In one of the cells, 209. Lucas felt every word like a blow. "I waited years for my husband to notice something was wrong," she continued. "When he didn't, I made a decision, not out of anger, out of responsibility." The judge nodded slightly, encouraging her to continue. "There were nights my son couldn't breathe," Hannah said. "And there were nights I couldn't reach his father. I stopped asking after a while. I stopped expecting help." Lucas clenched his jaw. When it was his turn, his attorney prompted him gently. Lucas stood, heart pounding, and spoke about intentions, about pressure, about mistakes, about how he never meant to abandon his family. The judge listened, then asked one question. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "when was the last time you attended your child's medical appointment?" Lucas opened his mouth. No answer came. Silence filled the room, heavy and unmistakable. The judge looked down at her notes. "Intent matters," she said evenly. "But patterns matter more." Lucas sat back down, the realization settling in with crushing weight. This wasn't about one affair, or one argument, or one bad night. It was about years of absence that Hannah had quietly endured. As the judge announced the court's preliminary findings, upholding temporary custody, maintaining the name change, enforcing supervised visitation, Lucas felt something slip beyond his grasp. Across the room, Hannah closed her eyes briefly. Not in triumph, in relief. She hadn't won a battle. She had reclaimed her life. And as Lucas watched her walk out of the courtroom without looking back, one truth echoed louder than anything else. He hadn't lost his family in a moment. He had lost it slowly while Hannah learned how to survive without him. And now, she was finally free. The fallout didn't come loudly. It arrived in quiet emails, subtle pauses, and conversations that ended too quickly. Lucas noticed it first at the office. His assistant stopped making eye contact. Meetings that once ran long now wrapped up early, decisions postponed until further notice. When he entered the conference room, the energy shifted, not hostile, just cautious, as if everyone were waiting to see what would happen to him next. By the end of the week, the first call came. A senior investor, polite, careful, concerned. "We've reviewed the situation," the man said. "Given the ongoing custody dispute and the nature of the allegations, we think it's best to temporarily distance the firm from your public role." Temporarily. The word sounded harmless, but Lucas knew better. Another call followed, then another. One by one, projects were reassigned, his name quietly removed from press materials, his access to certain accounts restricted pending review. In defest, Lucas sat alone in his office, long after everyone had left, staring at the city skyline he once felt ruled from above. He had always believed success insulated him, that money, power, and confidence could smooth over anything. He had been wrong. Meanwhile, Hannah's world moved in the opposite direction. The school counselor emailed her personally, commending her handling of Oliver's transition. The pediatric hospital assigned a dedicated care coordinator. Even the court-appointed evaluator noted Hannah's consistent presence and emotional stability. Stability. It was a word Lucas had never valued until he realized he didn't have it. His phone buzzed again. "Belle. I can't be seen with you right now," she wrote. "This isn't what I signed up for." Lucas stared at the message, then deleted the thread without replying. That night, he stood outside Hannah's new apartment building, watching lights flicker on one by one. He didn't go in. He didn't call. For the first time, he understood that showing up uninvited was no longer an option. Inside, Hannah sat at the small kitchen table, helping Oliver color quietly. His breathing was steady, his laughter soft but real. She watched him carefully, the way she always had, and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Peace. Not because everything was over, but because she was no longer waiting for someone else to change. Across town, Lucas poured himself another drink, the silence pressing in around him. He scrolled through old photos of a life he no longer recognized, trying to pinpoint when control had slipped through his fingers. And for the first time, the thought crossed his mind not as fear, but as certainty. He hadn't just lost in court. He was losing everything else too. And the more Hannah rebuilt her life, the clearer it became that Lucas's downfall was only just beginning. The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft hum of machines and the steady rhythm of Oliver's breathing. Hannah sat beside his bed, one hand resting gently on his arm, afraid to move too much, as if even a small shift might disturb the fragile peace she had fought so hard to protect. Oliver's eyes fluttered open slowly. "Mom?" he whispered. "I'm here," Hannah said at once, leaning closer. "I'm right here. In essence of." He studied her face for a moment, the way children do when they sense something has changed but don't yet have the words for it. His small fingers tightened around hers. "Did I do something bad?" he asked quietly. Hannah felt her chest tighten. "No, sweetheart. Why would you think that?" Oliver hesitated. "Dad doesn't come anymore, and my name is different now." He frowned, clearly struggling to connect the pieces. "Is it because of me?" The question landed like a knife. Hannah swallowed hard, forcing her voice to stay steady. "No, never because of you. None of this is your fault." "But Dad was mad," Oliver continued. "He was loud. And then he didn't come back." Hannah closed her eyes for a brief second, steadying herself. She had prepared for legal battles, for judgment, for loneliness, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. She brushed a curl off Oliver's forehead. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," she said gently, "and sometimes they don't know how to fix them right away." Oliver nodded slowly, then asked the question she had been dreading. "Does Dad still love me?" Hannah's throat burned. She leaned down and pressed her forehead to his. "I believe he does," she said honestly. "But loving someone also means showing up. And that's something he has to learn on his own." Oliver was quiet for a long moment. Then he whispered, "I like when it's just us. It's calm." End quote. Tears blurred Hannah's vision, but she smiled anyway. "I like that too." Later that night, after Oliver fell asleep again, Hannah stepped into the hallway and let the tears come. Not loud, not dramatic, just the release of months, years of fear, exhaustion, and doubt. A nurse passed by and offered a sympathetic smile. "He's doing well," she said softly. "You're a good mother." Hannah nodded, wiping her eyes. For the first time, she believed it wasn't something she had to prove anymore. Because no matter what the court decided next, no matter how Lucas fought or blamed or denied, one truth was undeniable. Her son felt safe with her. And that safety mattered more than any last name, any argument, any apology that came too late. And somewhere deep down, Hannah knew the hardest part of the story wasn't over, but neither was her strength. The final hearing arrived sooner than Hannah expected. The courtroom was fuller this time. A court reporter, the evaluator, a representative from Oliver's school. Even Lucas's father sat quietly in the back row, his posture rigid, his presence impossible to ignore. Hannah noticed Lucas glance at him once, then look away. Lucas looked different today. Not angry, not confident, just tired. His suit fit perfectly, but something about him felt smaller, as if the room itself no longer bent around his presence. Hannah felt no satisfaction in that realization, only a dull sadness for the man he could have been. The judge began by reviewing the updated evaluations. The court-appointed psychologist notes significant improvement in the child's anxiety symptoms, she read. This improvement correlates strongly with a stable routine under the primary care of the mother. Lucas's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Next came testimony from the pediatric specialist. Clear, measured, clinical. He confirmed that Oliver's hospitalizations had decreased since Hannah assumed full medical authority. Then the evaluator spoke. "In my professional opinion," she said, "Mrs. Hale provides a consistently nurturing and predictable environment. Mr. Whitmore demonstrates intent, but lacks demonstrated follow-through." Intent. The word hung in the air like a quiet indictment. When Hannah was called, she stood calmly, hands folded. "I don't want to erase Oliver's father," she said. "I want to raise my son in a home where he feels safe and heard. If his father chooses to show up in a healthy way, I will not stand in the way." Lucas closed his eyes briefly. When it was his turn, he stood slowly. "I made mistakes," he said, voice hoarse. "I didn't realize what I was losing until it was gone." The judge watched him carefully. "And what would you do differently now, Mr. Whitmore?" Lucas hesitated. That pause told Hannah everything. The judge nodded once, then looked down at her notes. "This court rules in favor of maintaining sole legal and physical custody with the mother. Supervised visitation will continue, with the option to revisit terms after documented compliance." The gavel came down softly. Final. Hannah exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. Lucas remained standing, frozen, as the room began to empty. His father rose and walked past him without a word. Disappointment etched deep into his face. Hannah gathered her things and turned to leave. At the door, she paused not to look back at Lucas, but to steady herself. Because she knew this ruling wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning, and the life she was about to build would no longer be shaped by fear, but by choice. The ruling didn't make headlines. There were no flashing cameras, no gossip columns celebrating Lucas Whitmore's loss. His downfall arrived quietly, the way real consequences often do, slipping into boardrooms and inboxes without ceremony. 2 weeks after the final hearing, Lucas was called into a private meeting with the firm's executive committee. He already knew what it was about. The room felt colder than usual, the long glass table reflecting his face back at him, drawn, older, unfamiliar. No one offered coffee. No one asked how he was doing. "We've completed our internal review," the managing director said, folding his hands. "Given the court's findings and the ongoing concerns about judgment and stability, we're placing you on indefinite leave from all leadership roles." Lucas opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. He saw it then. The decision had been made long before he walked into the room. "This is temporary," he said, grasping for ground. The director didn't answer directly. "Your access to firm accounts will be suspended effective today." That was it. Lucas cleared out his office in silence. The city skyline still glittered outside the windows, indifferent to the fact that he no longer belonged among the men who ruled it. He packed awards, framed photos, contracts he once believed made him untouchable. None of it mattered now. Across town, Hannah received an email of her own. The school offered Oliver a long-term support plan, including counseling and flexible attendance. The hospital confirmed full coverage for his treatment. Small victories, maybe, but to Hannah, they felt monumental. That evening, She and Oliver sat on the couch, sharing takeout, the television playing softly in the background. Oliver laughed, a real laugh, unrestrained, free. Hannah watched him closely, committing the sound to memory. Later, when Oliver fell asleep, Hannah checked her phone. A single missed call. Lucas. She didn't return it. She didn't feel angry anymore, just resolved. Meanwhile, Lucas sat alone in his dark apartment, the weight of silence pressing in from all sides. Belle hadn't called in days. Friends had stopped inviting him out. Even his father had gone quiet. For the first time, Lucas had nothing to distract him from the truth. He had lost not because Hannah had taken something from him, but because, step by step, he had given it all away. And as he stared at his reflection in the darkened window, a chilling realization set in. This wasn't the bottom. It was only the beginning of what he would have to face alone. Because while Hannah was building a life rooted in peace, Lucas was just starting to understand the cost of the man he had become. Belle Knox finally realized the silence wasn't temporary. At first, she told herself, Lucas just needed space. Men like him always came back once the noise settled. She scrolled through old photos, private jets, rooftop dinners, mirrors reflecting a life that felt expensive and untouchable. She posted carefully curated stories, designer heels stepping into black cars, champagne flutes catching light, hoping he would see them. He didn't. When she finally called, the number went to voicemail. Not once, not twice, every time. Belle sat in her apartment, the one Lucas had helped her pick, because it fit the image, staring at the walls that suddenly felt too white, too quiet. The lease was in her name. The furniture, too. None of it was an investment anymore. Just proof she had bet on the wrong future. She opened her laptop and checked her email. One message froze her breath. Subject: termination of contract. Effective immediately. The real estate firm she'd been freelancing for cited reputational concerns. Another email followed minutes later. Then another. One by one, the doors she thought were solid closed without explanation. Belle understood then. Lucas wasn't protecting her. He couldn't even protect himself. Across town, Hannah sat at the small desk in her apartment, reviewing a modest contract of her own. The school district had offered her a paid compliance consulting role, part-time, flexible, close to Oliver's schedule. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't power. It was dignity. She signed without hesitation. That night, Hannah cooked dinner while Oliver colored at the table. He told her about a new friend at school, about how his chest didn't hurt as much during recess anymore. Hannah listened, fully present, something she'd once dreamed of but never believed she could have. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She didn't answer. Meanwhile, Lucas sat alone in his dark apartment, staring at a message from Belle he hadn't opened yet. He already knew what it would say. Anger, blame, desperation. He deleted it without reading. Because for the first time, Lucas understood the symmetry of it all. Belle had chosen him for what he represented. Hannah had chosen Oliver for who he was. One woman built her future on proximity to power. The other built hers on responsibility. And as the night settled quietly over the city, two truths became impossible to ignore. Belle had lost everything, chasing an image that vanished the moment it stopped paying. Hannah had gained something far rarer: peace, purpose, and a life no one could take from her. And while one woman was left standing in the ruins of a choice she couldn't undo, the other was stepping forward, finally free to receive everything she had earned. The supervised visit was scheduled for a Saturday morning. Lucas arrived early, dressed carefully, as if presentation alone could change the outcome. The family services room was neutral by design: soft lighting, simple furniture, shelves of toys meant to feel safe but impersonal. Nothing here belonged to him. Not the space, not the rules, not the moment. A court-appointed supervisor greeted him with practiced politeness and reviewed the conditions again. No raised voices. No questioning the child about court matters. No discussion of the past. Lucas nodded through it all, jaw tight, every instruction a reminder of how far he had fallen. When Oliver walked in with Hannah, Lucas's breath caught. His son looked healthier. Thinner, maybe, but calmer. His shoulders weren't hunched the way Lucas remembered. He clutched a small toy car and glanced at his father with cautious curiosity. Not fear, but not comfort either. "Hi, buddy," Lucas said softly. Oliver hesitated, then nodded. Hi, Dad. I lunch informants. They sat across from each other, the supervisor nearby, clipboard in hand. Lucas searched desperately for something to say, something that wouldn't sound wrong. He asked about school, about the toy, about lunch. Ordinary questions, stripped of authority, stripped of confidence. Oliver answered politely, carefully. At one point, Lucas reached out without thinking, hand hovering just above Oliver's shoulder. The supervisor cleared her throat. Lucas pulled back immediately, the rejection burning hotter than he expected. Across the room, Hannah watched silently. She hadn't come to interfere. She hadn't come to gloat. She came because the court required her presence and because she needed to see for herself whether Lucas could respect boundaries. He tried. That was the hardest part to watch. Lucas didn't explode. He didn't blame. He didn't demand. He smiled too often, spoke too carefully, as if afraid any misstep would be recorded. And it was. When the visit ended, Oliver stood up quickly and walked back to Hannah's side. He didn't look back. Lucas remained seated, staring at the empty chair. Outside, Hannah knelt to zip Oliver's jacket. "Did you feel okay?" she asked gently. Oliver nodded. "Yeah. That's all that matters," she said, kissing his forehead. Lucas watched them from a distance, understanding something with painful clarity. Love alone wasn't enough. Showing up late, apologizing carefully, behaving when supervised, none of it erased years of absence. Trust wasn't restored on command. It was rebuilt slowly, if at all. As Lucas walked back to his car alone, the city felt louder than usual, sharper, unforgiving. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about how to win. He was thinking about how much he had already lost and whether he would ever be more than a visitor in his own child's life. Because the rules he once ignored were now the only reason he was allowed to stay at all. Hannah's new routine didn't look impressive from the outside. She woke up early, packed Oliver's inhaler and lunch, walked him to school, then caught the bus across town to a modest office building tucked between a pharmacy and a dental clinic. No skyline views. No executive parking. Just steady work and predictable hours. And for the first time in her adult life, that felt like wealth. Her consulting role with the school district grew slowly. She reviewed compliance files, helped restructure safety protocols, and trained administrators on crisis documentation. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. People listened when she spoke. They trusted her judgment. That trust healed something deep inside her. One afternoon, as Hannah packed up her laptop, the director stopped by her desk. "We're expanding the program," she said. "If you're interested, we'd like to offer you a permanent position. Benefits included." Hannah blinked, surprised. "I'd need flexible hours." The director smiled. "We assumed that." Hannah accepted on the spot. That evening, she picked Oliver up from school, where he ran toward her instead of walking. He talked non-stop about a science project, his breath steady, his steps light. Hannah listened, really listened, the way she once wished someone had listened to her. At home, they cooked dinner together. Oliver stirred while Hannah chopped vegetables, the kitchen filled with warmth and ordinary sounds. Later, they curled up on the couch, reading quietly. For the first time in years, Hannah didn't feel like she was waiting for something to go wrong. Her phone buzzed. Ethan Brooks. They hadn't spoken outside of appointments before. But during Oliver's last checkup, Ethan had lingered, asking Hannah how she was holding up, not just as a patient's mother, but as a person. Tonight, his message was simple. "I heard Oliver's doing better. Would you like to grab coffee sometime?" Hannah stared at the screen for a moment, heart steady, not racing. "Yes," she typed back. "I would." End Cass. Across town, Lucas sat alone in his apartment, scrolling through emails he no longer understood. The world kept moving without him. Meetings happened without his input. Decisions were made elsewhere. But Hannah didn't think about Lucas anymore. She thought about tomorrow, about stability, about the quiet joy of knowing her life no longer revolved around someone else's absence. As she tucked Oliver into bed, he wrapped his arms around her and whispered, "I like our life. It's as dumb a cover." Hannah kissed his forehead, eyes shining. "So do I," she said. Because without applause or revenge, she had rebuilt something stronger, and for the first time, it was truly hers. The morning of Oliver's school assembly arrived crisp and bright, the kind of day that felt like a beginning. Parents gathered near the iron gates, coffee cups in hand, cameras ready. Hannah stood among them, one arm around Oliver's shoulders as he adjusted his backpack, excitement written plainly across his face. He was scheduled to read a short passage on stage, nothing dramatic, just a few lines, but to Hannah, it felt monumental. "You ready?" she asked softly. Oliver nodded. "I practiced." "I know," she smiled. "You'll do great." Across the street, Lucas watched from his car. He hadn't planned to come. He told himself it would only make things harder. But his body had moved before his mind caught up, parking just far enough away to avoid being noticed. He stayed seated, hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the school entrance. He wasn't allowed inside. Not today. Not without permission. Not without someone watching. Lucas saw Hannah laugh at something Oliver said, saw her kneel to fix his collar. The ease of it hurt more than any courtroom ruling. This wasn't performance. This was life continuing without him. The bell rang, parents were ushered in, the gates closed. Lucas remained outside. He rolled down the window slightly and heard the muffled sound of applause drift from the auditorium. His chest tightened. Somewhere inside, his son was standing on a stage, using his voice, while Lucas stood on the sidewalk with nothing but regret. Inside, Hannah watched Oliver step forward when his name was called. "Oliver Hale," the teacher announced. Oliver didn't hesitate. He read clearly, confidently, his voice steady. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from pride. He looked stronger, safer, like a child who knew he belonged. When the assembly ended, Oliver ran to her, breathless. "Did you hear me?" "I heard every word," she said, pulling him close. As they walked home together, Hannah noticed Lucas's car across the street. She didn't stop, she didn't wave. She simply kept walking, Oliver's hand warm in hers. Lucas watched them go, the realization settling in quietly. This was the consequence. Not punishment, not revenge. Distance. He had become a man who watched life happen from the outside, measuring moments by what he was no longer part of. As Hannah and Oliver turned the corner, disappearing from view, Lucas leaned back in his seat, eyes closing briefly. For the first time, there was no one to blame. Only the echo of choices made too late. And as the gates remained closed behind him, Lucas understood that some doors don't lock, you simply stop being welcome on the other side. The letter arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, slipped under Lucas's apartment door like an afterthought. No logo, no legal seal, just his name, written carefully, unmistakably his father's handwriting. Lucas stared at it for a long time before picking it up. He hadn't spoken to Noah Whitmore Sr. since the final hearing. No calls, no advice, no lectures. That silence had weighed heavier than anger. Slowly, Lucas tore the envelope open. Inside was a single page. "I won't defend what you've done," the letter began. "I defended you for too many years already. This is not about punishment, it's about truth." Lucas swallowed hard and kept reading. "I reviewed your record the same way I reviewed thousands of cases in my career, not as your father, as a judge. And the conclusion was the same every time." Lucas felt his chest tighten. You believed intention was enough. You believed showing up when convenient could balance years of absence. That is not how trust works. Not in court, not in families. The words were calm, precise, devastating. "At some point," the letter continued, "a man has to face the life he built, not the one he imagined. Hannah did that. You didn't." Lucas lowered himself onto the couch, the paper shaking slightly in his hands. "There is no appeal for character," his father wrote. "Only accountability." The letter ended simply. "I hope one day you become someone your son can respect. Until then, distance is the consequence you earned." Lucas folded the letter slowly and set it on the table. For a long time, he didn't move. That evening, Hannah sat at her kitchen table, reviewing notes for work while Oliver did homework nearby. The window was open. Fresh air drifted in. Ordinary life, steady and unremarkable, exactly how she wanted it. Her phone buzzed. A message from the court clerk confirming the next review date months away. Plenty of time, no urgency, no fear. Hannah set the phone down and smiled faintly. Across the city, Lucas stood on his balcony, looking out at the skyline he once believed defined him. The buildings still stood, the lights still glowed, but none of it responded to him anymore. For the first time, Lucas understood something he had spent his life avoiding. Consequences didn't arrive with drama. They arrived with clarity. And clarity, once gained, couldn't be argued away. He closed his eyes, breathing slowly, the weight of his choices finally settling where excuses once lived. Because the reckoning he faced wasn't imposed by a court, it was the one that came when there was no one left to blame but himself. 2 years passed quietly. Not the kind of quiet that feels empty, but the kind that settles in after a storm, when what remains is solid and real. Hannah's life no longer revolved around reacting. It moved forward on its own rhythm: school mornings, work deadlines, doctor checkups that ended with reassuring smiles instead of fear. Oliver grew stronger. His asthma became manageable. His laughter came easier. He slept through the night. He no longer asked why things had changed, because for him, this was simply life now, and it felt safe. On a warm spring afternoon, Hannah stood in a small garden behind a restored townhouse just outside the city. White chairs were arranged neatly. Nothing extravagant, no audience, just people who mattered. Ethan stood beside her, calm and steady, the same way he had always been when things were hard. He hadn't rushed her, hadn't tried to replace anything. He had simply shown up, again and again, until trust formed naturally. When Oliver walked down the aisle carrying the rings, his smile was radiant. "Ready?" Hannah whispered to him. He nodded proudly. "I am." The ceremony was brief, honest. When Hannah said her vows, her voice didn't shake. "I promise to protect this family," she said, "not by control, but by presence." Ethan squeezed her hand, understanding exactly what that meant. Later, as guests laughed softly and the sun dipped low, Hannah watched Oliver run across the grass, free and unburdened. She felt something settle in her chest, not triumph, not revenge. Completion. Across town, Lucas sat alone in a smaller apartment, a life reduced to what he needed instead of what he wanted. He still attended supervised visits. He still followed the rules. Slowly, painfully, he was learning how to listen. He saw a photo online that evening. Hannah. Smiling, married, Oliver between them, glowing. Lucas closed the screen without anger, only understanding. Some lessons come too late to fix the past, but not too late to change the future. Hannah tucked Oliver into bed that night in their new home. He yawned, already half asleep. "I like our family," he murmured. Hannah kissed his forehead. "Me too." As she turned off the light, she realized something profound. She hadn't been rewarded with wealth or applause. She had been rewarded with something better. A life where love was consistent, where safety was real, where no one had to beg to be valued. And somewhere in the quiet of that truth was the answer to everything she had endured. Because when a woman chooses dignity over fear, life has a way of answering back with exactly what she deserves. The fallout didn't come loudly. It arrived in quiet emails, subtle pauses, and conversations that ended too quickly. Lucas noticed it first at the office. His assistant stopped making eye contact. Meetings that once ran long now wrapped up early, decisions postponed until further notice. When he entered the conference room, the energy shifted, not hostile, just cautious, as if everyone were waiting to see what would happen to him next. By the end of the week, the first call came. A senior investor. Polite, careful, concerned. "We've reviewed the situation," the man said. "Given the ongoing custody dispute and the nature of the allegations, we think it's best to temporarily distance the firm from your public role." Temporarily. The word sounded harmless, but Lucas knew better. Another call followed, then another. One by one, projects were reassigned. His name quietly removed from press materials. His access to certain accounts restricted pending review. Debt. Lucas sat alone in his office long after everyone had left. Staring at the city skyline he once felt ruled from above. He had always believed success insulated him, that money, power, and confidence could smooth over anything. He had been wrong. Meanwhile, Hannah's world moved in the opposite direction. The school counselor emailed her personally, commending her handling of Oliver's transition. The pediatric hospital assigned a dedicated care coordinator. Even the court-appointed evaluator noted Hannah's consistent presence and emotional stability. Stability. It was a word Lucas had never valued until he realized he didn't have it. His phone buzzed again. "Belle? I can't be seen with you right now," she wrote. "This isn't what I signed up for." Lucas stared at the message, then deleted the thread without replying. That night, he stood outside Hannah's new apartment building, watching lights flicker on one by one. He didn't go in. He didn't call. For the first time, he understood that showing up uninvited was no longer an option. Inside, Hannah sat at the small kitchen table, helping Oliver color quietly. His breathing was steady, his laughter soft but real. She watched him carefully, the way she always had, and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Peace. Not because everything was over, but because she was no longer waiting for someone else to change. Across town, Lucas poured himself another drink, the silence pressing in around him. He scrolled through old photos of a life he no longer recognized, trying to pinpoint when control had slipped through his fingers. And for the first time, the thought crossed his mind not as fear, but as certainty. He hadn't just lost in court, he was losing everything else too. And the more Hannah rebuilt her life, the clearer it became that Lucas's downfall was only just beginning.